Hi, my name is Jerry Strohkorb. I am an artist and physician, currently studying for my Master of Fine Arts at the School of Visual Arts in New York. I'm interested in pushing my art practice and growing into new areas. I'm happy to tell you about my work and how it has evolved over time. I am very interested in seeing the unseen, exploring complex inner emotional and psychological states. Lately, I've been very interested in exploring dehumanization in the healthcare system, the experience of life and death, and experiences of spirituality. Currently, I am inspired by German Expressionism and these many influences. Also, I am influenced by my awesome classmates and teachers at SVA. This large piece called Sensation is really about my personal experience of chronic depression. There are multiple symbols used in this piece, including falling, dimensionality, symbols of death. This was a large piece on wooden panel that hangs as a part of a triptych. This next piece, titled Rue, is really interesting to me because it is also a large wooden panel that was stained dark, and I used oil paint to bring the light back out. It gives it a real luminous stained glass quality. Originally, the piece was inspired by a nightmare, night specter. It involves a lot of symbols as well. This piece, titled Underneath, was inspired by a dream that I had in which I was submerging underwater, and I realized that I was going deeper and deeper inside myself. I got to the very bottom, or to the ground, and I had a real moment of clarity, and everything above the water was very unclear. This piece also explores my experience with depression and how that interaction regarding dysfunctional relationships, and its impact on my personal sense of well-being. There's a lot of triangle symbolism here, which represents the veil or the separation between the physical and the spiritual. This piece is called Kai series. These are four fairly large paintings that are shown as a group. This is me processing the experience of feeling despair, and as I went through a dark time, this piece helped me to process through that. Um, This piece, called Begin Series, is 6 small paintings that are hung together from right to left. I'm very interested in language, and this represents the Hebrew word Bereshit. Each painting represents one letter of the word, which means to begin. I did a whole series of atmosphere paintings, really trying to think about and understand the concept of the spirit. I made a conscious decision to focus on atmosphere, light and dark, and the ways that they interact with each other in order to process that idea. As part of the atmosphere series, during COVID especially, and those kind of the storm that we were going through, I started to process atmospheric storms. I'm really interested in the power and energy release and the stages of storms, and the symbolism of how that represented our lives at that time. I also show this atmosphere piece as well because I really like it, because it really helped me to kind of push into more abstract and non-representational qualities through some of these works, and I'm really interested in kind of pushing my art practice in more abstract ways. I started at the School of Visual Arts in the summer of 2022 and began to be inspired by New York City. I was observing and seeing aspects of dehumanization all around me, and I portrayed that in some of these early pieces, really focusing on isolation and protective spheres, also working in oil pastels for faster production. At SVA, I had a light bulb moment. I began to realize that I had a body of knowledge in healthcare as a physician that I'd never really turned towards to express and focus on. So I started to think about dehumanization in healthcare, especially through COVID, and began asking many questions about the edge of life and death and the interface of humans with machines. With some of these pieces, as I was at SVA, I was really trying to humanize the critically ill person. And in healthcare, people can become like objects. And so I wanted to really focus on the face of the human, this person that's interfacing with machine, and also ask questions about death of patients. The greenish haze represents death. During COVID, recommendations changed that people that were face down position had improved survival. So many patients were beginning to be put face forward or face down, which I found to be an even more dehumanized position. I was also exploring expressive color in these pieces to reflect the ominous, strong emotional state and death lingering. This piece also explores the edge of life and death, the way that the media flowed down the page. It gave this impression of a patient in quarantine or dehumanized behind plastic. The emotional state of the patient is hopeless, facing their own mortality. I also thought it gives an impression of fading into another dimension or reality. In my personal history with medical training, I had a very traumatic start training in surgery. So the operating room is something I wanted to start to address. The loss of control, the cold, sterile, unfeeling environment, the extreme lighting. So these are just some oil sketches in which I began to develop some of this imagery. This piece also showed an operating room scene, originally inspired by the idea of crucifixion and making this comparison between the total loss of control for the patient. But then it began to evolve, and I pushed the more fantastical parts of this piece, asking the question about the moment of death and what happens afterwards. Some of the various symbols here imply the afterlife. I decided to think about how dehumanization has affected me personally. While I was at MoMA, I saw a Kate Crawford work titled Anatomy of an AI System showing a large process map. I decided to build a process map of my degradation or dehumanization experience. It was so personal and vulnerable, I decided that I needed to abstract the piece. I was inspired by Joseph Stella's Brooklyn Bridge paintings. The final piece called Surge came about here. This is the final kind of evolution as it abstracted. It also was displayed with a video on the opposing wall, giving insight into my dehumanization experience. Through my studies with SVA, I became very inspired by German Expressionism, especially as it connects to me in my cultural heritage. I was very inspired by the color palette and distortion to show psychological and emotional states, and began planning a self-portrait series in motion. This piece involved 30 consecutive self-portraits to animate the short video. I was really learning and experimenting with the process of making painting in motion and trying to think about how I can further expand this concept into my art practice. So I'm very excited about that possibility. And thank you very much for listening to my presentation. It was my honor. Thank you.